After travelling up to Putre yesterday, today we just wandered around the area, acclimatising to the higher altitude before tomorrow's drive up onto the high Andean plateau.
It wasn't aimless wandering, of course. We were still looking for wildlife. It was chilly to begin with, and we were wrapped up warm with layers and gloves as we birded near the hotel. The birds were not yet very active, and so there was a bare-faced ground dove, just sat, feathers fluffed up, waiting for the sun. When it did come, the temperature rose quite quickly, and we were advised to apply sun cream. I suspect it was to do with the change in air pressure, but whatever it was, when I opened the bottle it came out like a white fountain. There was so much I shared it around. We used the bus to travel further up the road, where we first found a taruca, the North Andean deer. During the course of the day there were birds, but also a rather cute vizcacha. Although they look very like rabbits, vizcachas are actually a species of rodent. They feed on grasses, roots and seeds, but are mostly found in steep rocky terrain, perhaps because it is easier there to avoid land predators such as the Andean mountain cat. When the vizcacha saw us, it bounded away up the hillside, moving more like a kangaroo than a rabbit. Walking, albeit at a slow pace, was harder than we imagined, so although it was relatively early by our standards, once the sun disappeared and it became cold again, we decided it was time to head back to the hotel. I had heard a lot about altitude sickness and its dangers, but was prepared as I could be after the day around Putre. After a really good night's sleep, I was ready and eager for whatever was in store. The same could not be said for my roommate Andy, who was really suffering badly with headaches and nausea that stayed with him all day. In fact, he didn't move from the bus once. Everyone else was fine, and Andy did improve rapidly later in the day, once we had descended to a lower level. We set off, and as we drove higher, so we encountered small herds of vicuñas, a more graceful relative of the guanacos we had seen earlier in the trip. They are well adapted to life at high altitude in having a soft wool coat. This is much prized, and so to avoid poaching, these wild creatures are rounded up each year, and any vicuña with a coat of more than an inch long is shorn. While we were admiring the vicuñas, a puna tinamou was spotted, and we soon had a telescope set up for a closer look. We could see that this was a more colourful version of the Chilean tinamou we had seen on the way up to the Farallones earlier in the trip. It had a boldly striped head and chestnut underparts, and posed nicely before running swiftly away as it became aware of us.
The scenery on reaching the altiplano itself was spectacular, with scattered stunted shrubs and distant snow-capped volcanoes.
We were now in Lauca National Park, a huge protected area of 532 square miles. Most of the species we saw are restricted to the higher elevations, as their name would suggest. They were, for example, Andean swallows, Andean geese, and puna teal. We stopped at a park checkpoint, alighted from the bus to look around, and there, close by, perched on a wall, was a slender-billed myna. A rarity in Chile, we were told. We were just happy to see it. Continuing on, there was breathtaking scenery all around, and even the trucks passing by on the highway down to the coast didn't detract from our enjoyment. We saw a number of giant coots, which, as the name suggests, is the largest of Chile's 6 coot species. We only have one in this country, and is a high altitude specialist. We stopped for a meal overlooking Lake Chungara, a spectacular spot at 14,700 feet. There was a convenient sign to see we were at 4,500 metres, and we shared our lunch with Andean gulls, who behaved exactly the same as our gulls, squabbling over the scraps we threw to them. Later, we were fortunate to see an Andean gull on its nest. As the afternoon progressed, we negotiated our way through a customs post 5 miles from the Bolivian border. There was a long queue of trucks and tankers waiting for clearance to enter Chile. We reached another lake where we saw puna plover and puna ibis and could go no further. It was time to head for home, that being Arica and the Azapa Inn. There were stops along the way, one for a smart white-winged duiker finch, the other to let the brakes of the bus cool down. There had been considerable wind chill all day, despite the sun, and everything was dry. As a consequence, all the lorries that passed had created clouds of dust, which had gradually filled the bus, making it uncomfortable. As we left the Altiplano, we opened all the windows wide to disperse the dust, and luckily it was soon gone. With that, and with the air not as thin, we could all breathe more easily.
Our birding trip to Chile was almost done. Tomorrow we would be flying home.